Today I would like to talk about bad Pokemon abilities, but not the ones that are bad on purpose. There are certain abilities in the game that act as a deliberate handicap for a Pokemon, like Truant on Slacking, which restricts it from acting every other turn. The reason Slacking has this is because it has advantages in other areas, like its very high stats. This is obviously a bad ability to have, but that's by design. No, I would like to talk about abilities that are trying to do something that have what would seem to be a positive effect, but in practice are basically as good as having nothing. To me, these are the worst abilities, ones that weren't intended to be terrible, but are anyway. One example of such ability is Light Metal. You would probably not think of this as one of the worst abilities in the game, but it is really useless. Light Metal has the effect of halving a Pokemon's weight. Weight is an attribute that has pretty small application in Pokemon battles. Every Pokemon has a certain weight, and some moves will operate based on weight. For example, the move Low Kick is a fighting type attack that deals damage to the opponent based on their weight. Same with the special attack Grass Knot, exactly the same effect. So there is limited merit to this, in that you will take less damage from these specific attacks that do damage based on the enemy's weight, by halving your own weight. This by itself is already an extremely limited amount of value you're getting from this ability. You take a little bit less damage from 2 attacks. If these attacks are common enough and threaten you enough, it could be a good ability, but even then, if a Pokemon could just choose any ability to have, I don't think there's any scenario where a Pokemon would choose Light Metal and not something better. And also, what makes this ability even more awkward is the fact that everything that gets it is already extremely heavy. For example, Metagross. Metagross has the ability Light Metal, and Metagross has a weight of 550 kilograms. You might think I'm stupid for saying this, and a heavy Pokemon like this actually wants Light Metal the most to get the most out of the halving. But what's ridiculous about this is even a Metagross with Light Metal to halve its weight still is so heavy that it takes max damage from Low Kick anyway, the move that deals damage based on weight. Even if you halve Metagross's weight, it doesn't reduce the damage of Low Kick at all. So it makes you question why the hell they even gave Light Metal to Metagross, because it sincerely provides zero benefit to it. In fact, it is actually a detriment, because a lot of heavy Pokemon take advantage of their weight for their own gain. There's a move called Heavy Slam that is a steel type attack that deals more damage the heavier you are than the target. So obviously you want to be as heavy as possible to do as much as possible with Heavy Slam. But Light Metal will halve your weight, reducing the damage of Heavy Slam for no benefit because all of the weight-based attacks do max damage to you anyway. So Light Metal is genuinely as good as having Run Away. It has zero benefit. It's actually worse because it nerfs the damage of Heavy Slam, which is a great attack on Metagross. In general, all the Pokemon that get Light Metal have far better ability options. Metagross itself has Clear Body, which is very powerful. Scizor has Technician, which is the whole reason to use it, to boost its Bullet Punch. To forego that for slightly less damage from Low Kick is ridiculous. And Registeel also has Clear Body, significantly better than Light Metal. The only application for Light Metal that has ever seen any competitive use is that if you are using Mega Scizor in Gens 6 or 7, it is slightly more optimal to run Light Metal instead of Technician in the base form, because when you switch in, you will take slightly less damage from Low Kick. And when you Mega Evolve, your ability will be Technician anyway, so it just makes switch-ins slightly safer. But this is an extremely marginal difference that you're only running because there's no downside to running it. There's no sacrifice, because Mega Scizor always Mega Evolves. It never delays the Mega Evolve. But Scizor itself, in its base form, would never choose to run Light Metal, and the benefits of this ability are minuscule to begin with, and it's a sick joke that everything that gets it not only has a better ability, but in some cases actually suffers for having it. I suppose they could, in theory, design a Pokemon that gets value out of Light Metal, maybe something particularly vulnerable to Low Kick, but the problem with that is that, of course, everything that gets Light Metal is going to be a Steel type because it's got metal in the name, so thematically it would make no sense to give it to Swampert or something, who might get value out of the Grass Knot reduction. But the other thing is that Low kick is like the 4th most common fighting type attack or something. You're going to still be vulnerable to close combat and drain punch and high jump kick and body press and all of these other fighting type attacks, so just nerfing the damage of low kick alone isn't that good. It's just not that great of an effect. Another ability that I think really stinks is Tangled Feet, and I hate this one in particular because this is the hidden ability they decided to give to Dodrio, who I'm very fond of, who I value. And of all hidden abilities to give this in the game, you give it this useless Tangled Feet, which is like an insult to Dodrio, suggesting that he doesn't know how to do a basic action like walking or running, and his feet get tangled when he attempts to do so. That's ridiculous. Tangled Feet has the effect of granting double evasion if your Pokemon is confused. In competitive singles, this is one of the only legal ways to gain evasion, actually, but they don't even bother banning it or anything because the practical application of it is pretty much non-existent. Not many Pokemon run direct confusion inflicting moves. The most prominent one's probably Pecharunt, but that's not relevant to this because Dodrio is not going to be used in OU, of course. Some secondary effects apply confusion. Maybe something might run Confuse Ray for lack of much better. But confusion is just not going to happen commonly enough to actually activate this evasion from an enemy confusing you. And even if it does happen, and you get evasion while confused, usually when you're confused you want to switch out to reset the confusion. This incentivizes you to stay in, and it's just a complete casino. Because yes, you've got evasion to dodge attacks, but you might hit yourself in confusion, for goodness sake. It creates very perverse incentives for Dodrio to stay in with its Tangled Feet and hurt itself. I consider this very dangerous to Dodrio's future, to give it the ability Tangled Feet. And what's even crazier is the fact that when confusion runs out, Tangled Feet's evasion effect goes away. You don't even permanently get an evasion boost or anything, it's just a doubled evasion while confused specifically. And confusion can go away at any point. The longer you're confused, the higher the chance to snap out of it. What a terrible ability design. When is this ever going to come up and save you? When is this ever going to have a practical application? Goodness gracious. And this is what they give Dodrio as a hidden ability, an opportunity to buff it. Its other abilities kind of suck, and this is what they give it? Now, it's worth mentioning that Dodrio does have a way to self-inflict confusion with the move Thrash, which is like Outrage, but normal type. It's 120 power normal physical attack that locks you into it for 2 to 3 turns and then confuses you afterward. But this move is absolutely terrible. To lock into a normal move is incredibly punishable. So many things resist normal. Ghosts are immune to normal. Maybe in a scenario where the stars align, it lasts for 2 turns, you confuse yourself. And then you, click it again? Try to get evasion while also not hitting yourself in confusion? How do they think this is going to work? How did they think Tangled Feet would play out? It's such a ridiculous concept for an ability. And the greatest sick joke is the fact that in Gen 9, Tangled Feet is the optimal ability to use on Dodrio purely because its other 2 abilities are literally useless. Runaway has no competitive use, and Early Bird, which drops the sleep counter by 2 instead of 1 every turn, has no effect because sleep is banned in Gen 9, so this has 0 benefit. So Tangled Feet is the best ability it has, because it might come up and save you, perhaps, if you get confused by Water Pulse or something and then dodge a Stone Edge, I don't know. That could happen, I guess, but it's just terrible that Dodrio is forced to run this garbage ability instead of literally anything else in the world. I guess not literally anything else, because it chooses it over 2 other things that do exist. That's a little bit dishonest, Jim. It's literally using Tangled Feet over other options. Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize for what I said. But you know what I mean. Tangled Feet is a lower-end option in the grand scheme of Pokemon abilities for Dodrio to have access to. Another Pokemon that gets Tangled Feet is Mr. Rime. That's good. That's going to be helpful to the Ice Psychic type Pokemon with absolutely 0 competitive merit. Let's give it Tangled Feet for some evasion while confused. Oh, good. Oh, lovely. Suppose this one makes a bit of thematic sense. Mr. Rime does do a tap dancing animation in the game, so perhaps his feet could get tangled. Dodrio would never. It just doesn't make any sense for Dodrio. Mr. Rime, on the other hand, might get its feet tangled and suffer as a result. So at least there's logic behind this one, but I still think it's a bit of a cosmic joke for Mr. Rime. Up next is the ability Rivalry, which a few Pokemon get, but I don't think a single one of them has ever deliberately chosen to use it in human history. I sincerely think that an ability that does nothing is better than Rivalry. Rivalry is a gender-based ability. The Pokemon will do 1.25x damage to enemy Pokemon of the same gender, but 0.75x damage to Pokemon of the opposite gender. So more damage to the same gender, less to the opposite gender. This is just absolutely terrible. You cannot predict with any reliability what gender the opponent's Pokemon will be. Some Pokemon have to be a specific gender, but for the most part it's just completely random. So the extra damage on certain targets is so not worth it for the decreased damage on plenty of other targets. You'd rather just run nothing to be more consistent across the board. Pyroar gets this ability, but Pyroar would rather run the ability Unnerve to at least prevent the opposing Pokemon from eating berries. That might achieve something, and it also doesn't nerf its damage unnecessarily in certain matchups. Pyroar also gets Moxie, but is probably not going to use that because it's a special attacker, so the ability of choice is probably just Unnerve. Not an exciting ability itself, but at least it has a benefit and does not make all of its damage completely inconsistent and varied. Haxorus also gets Rivalry, but for goodness sake, who the hell would use Rivalry over the far superior Mold Breaker, which ignores enemy abilities? And then it's on Luxray. I mean, for absolute goodness sake, in what world would Luxray ever use this over Intimidate or Guts? I'm not sure if there's a scenario where a Pokemon would choose Rivalry over a different ability, to be honest. Unless it's their only ability or they have Truant or something as the other option, which is so actively detrimental that Rivalry is a step up. Truly dreadful ability, all around. I feel as if somebody over at Pokemon headquarters is anti-bird. I'm just gonna say it, I think someone at Pokemon HQ hates birds. Because a lot of these abilities that stink are bird themed and they just slap them on bird Pokemon and call it a day. I'm telling you. Tangled Feet is one of them. Another one is Big Pecs. A bunch of bird Pokemon get big pecs, and it's the most boring, nothing ability ever. Big pecs prevents your defense from being lowered. First of all, how does this even make any sense with the name of the ability? Wouldn't this be an offensive ability of some sort? A peck is an aggressive attack, is it not? And if you have big pecs, does this enhance the damage of like Drill Peck or something? Just throwing a different idea out there, but why would big pecs grant you a defense drop immunity? Also, this effect is scarcely very useful. A few things drop defense in this game. Certain attacks have it as a secondary effect. Maybe you're playing against a child who's running Tail Whip or something. But it's pretty marginal. This is an extremely specific thing. It's not going to come up too often that a defense drop immunity will save your life. And it's also difficult not to compare this to Clear Body, which just grants a complete immunity to all stat drops, and view it as a directly inferior version of that. And what's funny is some other abilities that grant a specific stat drop immunity can work. In particular, immunity to attack being dropped from Hyper Cutter is useful because of how ubiquitous Intimidate is. So attack drops are more common, and therefore just an immunity to attack drops is still viable. But the defense drops are just far less frequently seen, and therefore Big Pecs is a bit of a snooze. Many of the Pokemon with big pecs also get very little out of it, like Bombardier, who is not a good defensive Pokemon. It's not really suffering from defense drops all the time, so why in the hell would you run big pecs on Bombardier? What are you talking about? You're gonna run Rocky Payload, its signature ability that deals bonus rock damage. That's far better. I guess maybe you'd run big pecs if you're not running a rock move on Bombardier. That's true, but it would scarcely come up. You'd just be running it for lack of much better. Truly. It wouldn't actually have much benefit. And then there's Swanna. Swanna has access to big pecs, which is probably its best ability in many cases, because Keen Eye isn't that good and Hydration is only good on rain teams. But the guy has 63 base defense. It's not a defensive superstar or anything. What is it doing with big pecs? I mean, maybe like a bulky water type would benefit from this ability or something, or somebody that might get broken through by liquidation spam, or some other thing that lowers defense and eventually defeated. There could be marginal value to that. But none of these Pokemon even want big pecs. It doesn't usually suit most fighting types. Maybe Mandibuzz could use it. Mandibuzz is the greatest big pecs Pokemon in history because it's got good defenses. It might get broken through by a defensive drop in the event that it does happen. And maybe you could justify it over Overcoat in Gen 9 at least, because the powder moves immunity doesn't come up all that often with sleep moves banned, so what powder moves are you really worried about? Sandstorm immunity is good, but Tyranitar is also not the most common matchup in the world, and neither is the Hippo. So I guess Mandibuzz could use big pecs, but it's still a bit of a snooze of an ability that is inferior to Clear Body and marginally beneficial at the best of times, you know? I don't really like it thematically. I don't like how they slap it on so many different bird Pokemon instead of doing something more interesting that's bird related. Birds are cool. They do all sorts of interesting things, and you could make an ability that reflects that shows some respect to birds rather than disrespecting birds, which is what you're doing with this ability. The ability Healer is also a very poorly designed ability that is basically useless, and no Pokemon with it would ever choose to use it over any alternative. Healer has the effect of granting a 50% chance to cure your ally's status ailment at the end of each turn. So this has an effect in doubles battles only. In singles battles, this just does nothing at all. But in doubles battles, you might, with a coin flip's chance, heal the status of your ally at the end of a turn. It is better than nothing in a doubles battle, I'll give them that. It is not actively detrimental and it might help you. But not only is this a 50% chance at an advantage, but it's kind of slow-paced for doubles battles. Doubles is a fast-paced format. You can't really stall and sit there going for status curing in a format like this. It's not that beneficial, and this is also conditional on your ally being status, which is not something that's going to happen all the time. In many battles, this will just be totally useless and not help you very much, and you'd rather something more useful. And what's funny about this is 50% is buffed from what it was before. This was formerly a 30% chance to cure your ally. They buffed the ability in Pokemon Champions, but it's still useless. It's still terrible. The only Pokemon that ever uses this ability is Mega or Dino, because it has to. When it Mega Evolves, its only ability option is Healer. And even with this buffed version of it, and this effect that is only good in doubles, I would still say this is the worst Mega Evolution in all of Pokemon Champions, with pretty much no viability at all. I think this is just a dysfunctional ability design. At least a similar effect, Shed Skin, has more application. In the 6v6 singles environment, Shed Skin has more chances to come up. It can synergize with self-inflicted status, like from Rest. I think Healer might also be decent if the effect just applied to Mega or Dino itself, and its ally. I don't even think that would be too overpowered or anything. That would probably be fine. I think it would still be a pretty bad Mega in the competitive doubles context, but it would at least do something in singles now. And would it be so bad for this to cure its status with a 50% chance at the end of each turn in singles? I don't think that would be over the top or anything. It's a truly tragic ability that has unfortunately held this Mega Evolution back for all of its life. Anticipation is another one. Anticipation is, I suppose, a fairly interesting effect, I'll give them that, but it is pretty boring as well, and never better than an alternative ability. Anticipation will, on switch in, reveal to you if the enemy has a super effective move or a one-hit KO move on their moveset. So this provides you a tiny little bit of information. Sometimes this information will be useful. You will be illuminated to the fact that the enemy has a move that can hit you, when otherwise you wouldn't be. But the weird part about this is that it's only on switch-in that this happens. So you are making a defensive switch, and then being given some information that ironically might be too late, or that might be revealed to you at that moment as they use a super effective move against you. That could be terrible. I suppose the ideal scenario is you switch in on a resisted hit and then realize they have a super effective move and switch again instead of staying in. The thing is though, it's often pretty clear when a Pokemon has a super effective move anyway. Sometimes this might be a surprise, but a lot of the time it's information you will already be aware of. And the fact that it's only on switch in just really limits it. Maybe if this happened every time the enemy switched in or anytime a new Pokemon switches in, and for each new Pokemon that switches in you are informed whether they have a super effective move or not, that would be perhaps more valuable, but as it stands the move has limited value. The Pokemon that get it also tend to have far better abilities. One Pokemon that gets it is Hatterene, and I mean, come on. The whole reason you use Hatterene is for Magic Bounce, one of the strongest abilities in the game. Anticipation will never be picked on Hatterene. It's also on Toxicroak, whose claim to fame is dry skin for water immunity and chip healing in rain. So, of course, to use Anticipation on Toxicroak is a bit absurd. Maybe the only guy who would ever use it is Whiscash, because its other abilities are not that amazing. Oblivious is probably the best generally for Intimidate immunity and Taunt immunity. I mean, that probably comes up more often than Anticipation. Its other option is Hydration, which grants status curing in rain, and rain is not always going to be active. But Anticipation might inform you that they have a grass move, and since you're ×4 weak to grass, that's a big concern. You're also only weak to one type, so it narrows down what Anticipation can reveal, which means the information you receive is more specific and useful to you, possibly. This could be useful for scouting, but I'm sure Oblivious is just better, honestly. So even Whiscash would rather the fairly unexciting option of Oblivious over Anticipation, to be honest with you. Another ability I think is quite useless is Flower Veil. A couple Pokemon get this one, and it has extremely limited value. Flower Veil will grant grass types on your side of the field immunity to status and immunity to having their stats lowered. So this is another doubles focused ability. If you have an ally that is a grass type in doubles, they won't be able to have their stats lowered by the common Intimidate, and also won't be able to be inflicted by status. Maybe if this was on a Pokemon that was better in doubles generally and had more useful tools for doubles, it could see some use and genuinely support an ally. But unfortunately this ability is only on a couple of Pokemon, none of which are that great in the doubles context. Florges is one of them. And Florges is just not that amazing in doubles. It's a generic fairy type. There are better fairy types that do more and have more value. And Flower Veil is not enough to set Florges apart very much. There is Comfey, but Comfey would rather use its far better ability Triage, which grants +3 priority to healing moves, a great ability. It is far superior to Flower Veil. The one time you might see this is on Eternal Floette, because Eternal Floette can get this ability and maybe get some value out of it before it Mega Evolves. Most of the time Mega Floette is just going to Mega Evolve as soon as possible to get Fairy Aura, but perhaps there's some niche circumstance where you want to delay your Mega Evolve to get the Flower Veil value for your allied grass type. But that is the only scenario, and it's another case similar to Mega Scizor mentioned earlier, where the base form can run the ability because it's going to Mega Evolve and change its ability anyway, so there might be a small fractional advantage to it in a specific circumstance that isn't any opportunity cost because of the fact that you're changing your form regardless. But beyond that, Flower Veil is pretty ineffective. This ability could be good if it was on a grass type though, because then it would be applying this effect to itself and granting itself status immunity and stat lowering immunity. And in fact, Florges could in theory terrestrialize grass to gain status immunity from its own ability, but grass is not an amazing type to Terra into for this Pokemon. And also what I'm talking about is theoretical. They have never made a grass type with Flower Veil. I'm doubtful that they ever will. Maybe they will. But this is clearly designed as a double support ability, and it's just not that effective at that. Another poor ability design, in my opinion, Steadfast. Steadfast is an ability with the effect that if you receive a flinch, if you are flinched, you will gain a speed boost, +1 speed. I mean, maybe this ability could save you in a very specific circumstance, particularly against something like Ironhead Jirachi, who has a high flinch chance. But what's funny is that one of the Steadfast Pokemon, Lucario, just has Inner Focus, which is a far superior option in that instance, which grants a complete immunity to being flinched. A flinch immunity is far more relevant than +1 speed if flinched, I think. In practice, this is an advantageous effect tied to getting unlucky. I suppose designed as a hedge against that poor fortune, but the fact that this effect is tied to the secondary effect of a move that is inherently not guaranteed to occur just makes it a weird choice. You would only really use this if it was your only option. Anything that gets this uses something else instead. There's one Pokemon that has to use it, and that is Mega Mewtwo X. But Mega Mewtwo X gets less out of it than most. Who's flinching Mega Mewtwo X? It's incredibly fast. It's an offensive threat. Steadfast is so useless on Mega Mewtwo X. Maybe if it was on something slow that is prone to getting flinched in particular, but I don't even know if such a Pokemon exists. Or that if there was one, that they would even choose to use this over other alternatives. It's unreliable, it's weird, it's not very good. And I suppose we could also talk about abilities that could be good in theory, but are given to Pokemon that cannot take advantage of them at all. One of these abilities is Stench. Stench has the effect of granting moves without a chance to flinch a 10% chance to flinch. That's what we need, folks, more flinch chances. Even though this ability is clearly immoral in its design, it could be good. Just an extra 10% flinch chance on all your moves, that could win you a game randomly. That could be incredible, but everything that gets Stench sucks at using it. One of the Pokemon that gets Stench is Muck. And I love Muck. Muck is a dear friend of mine. But Muck, how are you ever going to be outrunning anything with your base 50 speed? Be serious. Muck understands this. Okay, Muck is not dumb. And for this reason, Muck chooses to use Sticky Hold for insurance against item removal, or Poison Touch for a bit of poison spreading. Muck does not play to strengths that don't exist. Muck understands its strengths and plays to them because it's an intelligent being. Okay, so don't disparage Muck for having Stench. He doesn't use it, because he doesn't get anything out of the Stench. Does he? If any of you disparage Muck or call him stupid, I will be very upset with you, okay? So do not do that. Other Pokemon that get Stench include Skuntank, and I guess of all of them, Skuntank would be the most effective at using it with its 84 speed. But even here, the effects and the benefits of Stench are marginal, and you would probably just rather run the ability Aftermath, which has a more guaranteed impact. Aftermath will deal a quarter of the enemy's HP when you are KO'd, a bit of a built-in explosion sort of thing, a punishment for KOing you. Actually a pretty good ability that always does a bit of chip damage to things. Stench, on the other hand, is a 10% chance to flinch things on your attacks. Skuntank isn't the fastest thing on the planet. You could use this. I'm sure some players do choose to use this in the tiers where Skuntank exists for the possible benefit of it, but the more reliable Aftermath is a superior choice here. And then the other Pokemon that gets Stench is a real sick joke. It's Weezing, for goodness sake. Weezing of all things. Weezing literally has two other great abilities. Levitate, which grants an immunity to ground, one of the most consistently good abilities in the game, and then Neutralizing Gas, which is an incredible ability that disables the effects of other abilities. And in fact, it's one of Weezing's claim to fame. To use Stench would be ridiculous on Weezing because it's also a very slow Pokemon with 60 speed. What sort of moron would use Stench on Weezing? Don't be absurd. Now, there could be a universe where Stench could be quite strong on something fast that is good on its own merits anyway. Imagine Dragapult with Stench. That would be really annoying, but undeniably pretty good. Dragapult doesn't really need an ability to be good. Its other abilities are marginally useful anyway. Maybe Infiltrate is better. But Stench could be considerable over Infiltrator if it had it, to just get flinch chances randomly and bail you out. But nothing that gets Stench is that amazing at using it or really wants to use it. So it's a weird one. There are also some ability choices on Pokemon that are specifically terrible for that particular Pokemon, to the point where it's probably a deliberate joke from the developers, but interesting to highlight regardless. One of the most infamous examples is Rotom Fan, who has the ability Levitate. Amazing ability, of course, but not so amazing when your Pokemon is a flying type. Levitate grants ground immunity, but the flying type is already immune to ground, so this is a complete waste. A complete terrible waste. Now, if we're being precise, there are some small benefits to having Levitate on Rotom Fan. You are still immune to ground if you terrestrialize into a different type. So that's good. If Rotom Fan terrestrializes water or something, it will not lose its ground immunity, but I mean, whatever. Pretty much the most useless ability choice on a Pokemon that you can imagine. And there is also the example of Stunfisk, who has the ability Limber, which grants an immunity to paralysis. But Stunfisk has many different ways that it is immune to paralysis. Electric types are literally immune to all forms of paralysis, but then on top of that, it's also a ground type, which is immune to Thunder Wave as well. You got 3 stacked immunities to paralysis on top of one another to the point where it's excessive, Stunfisk. You're very concerned about being paralyzed. I don't know why, it doesn't look like you have much mobility to begin with in that state. Little flat fish creature. You do have some fins to the side, but I don't know how exactly you're going to move around very effectively. I don't think being paralyzed would detriment you that much. You're already struggling as is, but regardless, you have Limber and electric typing and ground typing, all preventing you from being paralyzed. If someone ever manages to paralyze a Stunfisk somehow, I would be very surprised. I suppose they'd have to terrestrialize into a different type, and then you select a paralysis-inflicting move with Mold Breaker. And then you could paralyze Stunfisk. This would be a truly historic moment if it did happen. I don't think it has ever happened. And of course, an example that you see all the time is the ability Pressure being thrown on random Pokemon, whether it works for the Pokemon or not. Pressure is an ability that causes the enemy to consume twice as much PP when they utilize attacks against you, and this ability can be very good on a defensive Pokemon that is good at stalling turns, like Suicune for example. But Pressure is not so good on Weavile. As a different example, Weavile has Pressure, which would appear to be pretty much completely useless. It may have marginal benefits. You can stall twice as much PP. That might save you if you stall Hydro Pump or something in a game-winning scenario. I don't know exactly. Something like that could come up. But for the most part, this is a complete mismatch between the Pokemon design and its ability. Weavile is famous for its frailty with very low defense and HP and a typing that makes it wide open to a million different super effective moves. How exactly is Weavile going to get anything out of Pressure? It's a strange choice on the Pokemon, not only in its game design, but also thematically. Is Weavile applying pressure to the Pokemon universe? Is it a particularly stressful Pokemon? I don't know, it sort of looks angry. I might be under some pressure if I'm encountering a Weavile in the wild and I have to escape, but I don't know. It calls into question the thematic design of Pressure to begin with. What sort of pressure? It's too general of a concept, Pressure. If it's offensive pressure, it doesn't really fit because it's a defensive ability. It's like a psychic pressure of some sort that means you're feeling embarrassed or stressed by how long the game is taking, and in the event of a Suicune resting over and over, you're under so much pressure that you're utilizing resources faster. I don't know. The developers clearly didn't think this one through, okay? I'm smart, and the people who make Pokemon don't know anything. To give Weavile pressure is just an insult. Deoxys Attack has pressure. This one is absurd. The lowest defense you've ever seen, with 20 defense and special defense and 50 HP. Deoxys Attack is scarcely getting any value out of Pressure. It truly is an ability that they just throw on when they don't have any other ideas. It's often thrown onto legendaries. Dialga and Palkia have it. Mewtwo has it. All of the Deoxys forms have it. Plenty of random Pokemon like Weavile. And oh, I don't know, why don't we look through the list at all the things with Pressure? Vespiquen has Pressure. I guess it might be able to use it. It has 102 defense, but its typing is terrible. Bisharp has Pressure. Is that because you're under pressure in a game of classical chess or something? I didn't even realize Bisharp had Pressure because it is far more likely to use its ability Defiant. I'm sick of things getting Pressure. I hope in the next game they don't give any of the legendary Pokemon Pressure. I hope nothing has Pressure. We got enough Pressure Pokemon. We have a surplus of them. Some of them are questionable in whether or not they apply pressure thematically speaking, and so I think that you should pump the brakes on giving Pokemon Pressure. I hope this video didn't come across too negative. I mean, the title is inherently negative, the worst abilities, so of course I'm going to be talking about how bad they are, but some of these are at least an interesting idea that didn't quite pan out in practice, and I can give them credit for that. Not every ability is going to be a slam dunk. But in some cases, these abilities are lazy or kind of basic, or you question why they even made them in the first place because they just don't make any sense, like Steadfast or something. Some of these abilities just serve no purpose or are actively frustrating when they are applied to yet another Pokemon that is not going to really do anything with them. Thank you for watching to the end. You are presented with a door, and you must decide what to do next with the tools available to you. That is all I can say. Thank you for watching.